At this hour, Republicans are still 7 seats shy of the 218 seats they need for a majority. But even if they eke out a small majority, House Speaker Mike Johnson will face the same problem Republicans have faced for the last 2 years, an ungovernable House Republican conference where any one member has the power to throw everything into chaos. Joining me now is a man who knows chaos well, Brendan Buck, former press secretary to Republican House Speakers Boehner and Ryan. Brendan, so here's the thing. Well, first of all, do you think there's any reason to believe that the raucous House conference becomes any less raucous if there is a Republican in the White House? Do you think that the pattern we've seen play out over and over again over the last couple of years somehow changes?
I think they'll probably be a little more disciplined because I think Donald Trump has a lot more sway in keeping them,
in line?
More than Mike Johnson does, for sure. But I think the important distinction, as you're hitting at, is this majority is going to be significantly smaller than what we dealt with when Donald Trump was first president.
Yeah.
I was walking through New York earlier and remember it was 8 years ago that me and Paul Ryan and a few folks went to go meet with Donald Trump to kind of talk about our agenda as he was the president-elect at the time, trying to get him to understand, okay, this is what we're going to do here. And he was basically saying, you go figure that part out. I trust you to be in charge of sort of my legislative agenda. I don't think that's going to happen this time anymore. Yeah. He's not handing this over to anybody. He thinks this is his government. He's calling all of the shots. And so now he's going to put this all in Mike Johnson to execute. However, we had a 20-seat majority back then, and we still had trouble doing, as you talked about earlier, failed on health care because we didn't have the votes. They can't get really anything on their own with the 2 or 3, 4 seat majority they have now. I don't know why if they're trying to do even bigger things. They were doing really nothing of consequence the last couple of years, and they still couldn't get anything done. So now you're talking about big things, and you have almost no margin for error. It's going to be very difficult for Mike Johnson.
And they also have a new rule that any one member can force a motion to vacate, to oust the speaker. Do you think... I mean, on one hand, one would think Donald Trump would like stability in the House. Mike Johnson is his partner. Let's get rid of that rule. On the other hand, Trump loves people getting fired, loves firing them. Do you think that rule changes?
I can't imagine it changes because enough members will think that's their accountability for the speaker to hold him in line. It's an impossible situation.
It's a door in the floor under every seat.
Absolutely. I do think, though, that back then, in 2017, it was actually a lot of like the Freedom Caucus guys who were giving us problems, and Donald Trump was trying to convince them, and he couldn't a lot of times. That's not going to happen this time. Right. Nobody's going to stand up to Donald Trump in the House. The problem is there aren't a whole lot of moderates either left. This is a very uniform Congress or conference. Maybe it's not a problem for them. Maybe the House has been really remade in his image, and there aren't a whole lot of independent types. The Liz Cheneys and the Adam Kinzingers, they're not, or the Paul Ryans are no longer around. Yeah,
well, there aren't as many moderates, but it also could be a 1-seat majority, Brendan, right? Which means that, you know, losing anyone in a midterm means you lose the majority. Hakeem Jeffries becomes Speaker of the House. Do you read anything into the fact that Republicans have gained a net of 2 seats so far, but Democrats are ahead in at least 1 Republican seat that hasn't been called? It's, you know, Hakeem Jeffries says the House is in play. Even if it goes to Republicans, it's going to be incredibly narrow. And I wonder if that tells you anything in a moment when Donald Trump gets reelected resoundingly. But the House is not given over to Republicans resoundingly. What you read of that disparity?
Well, any new president, any congressional majority is going to say they have a mandate. He can have a 2-seat majority in the House, and they're going to say they have a mandate, and they're not going to be interested in any bipartisanship. I know the culture.
I would never suggest that.
I know the culture of that conference well enough to know that the idea that, as Senator Klobuchar was talking about, well, let's figure out some bipartisan things to work on. There may be some things you can do on the margins.
But the Senate's a different animal to some degree, too.
Well, you need the House to pass it, and they're going to say, look, if the Senate's trying to do bipartisan things, the House, even if they have the votes for it, is going to say, we don't want you to bring that up on the floor. We have no interest in that. We just got elected to a majority. Donald Trump is our president. We were given a mandate to do conservative things, and that's going to be the entire mindset of the entire conference.
Well, right, for at least 2 years. I mean, I just wonder how much you think that this is going to be a go-for-broke strategy, knowing full well that they could be ousted, again, if it's a 1-seat majority in 2022, depending on how hardcore they want to get for those first 2 years.
I don't know exactly what the House Republican Conference agenda is, other than the tax bill. Preserving the tax law, of course, that's going to be the top priority. The things that Donald Trump says he wants to do are mostly things he can do himself. Tariffs, deportations. Now, he's going to need resources to do that kind of thing. And that's where the rub is going to be. Funding the government, getting money for things, increasing the debt limit. Those are the places where Republicans have run into a wall and have had to have Democrats bail them out. That's where the really interesting dynamic is going to come to. They're probably going to end up punting. There's a government funding deadline at the end of this year. They're probably going to extend it into next year because Republicans think they'll have full control. They can do whatever they want. Reality is going to catch up to them. They're not going to be able to pass on their own funding for the government. They're going to need Democrats. So there's going to be these awkward points.
Say it again. They're going to need who? Say it again.
They're going to come to Hakeem Jeffries and say, I need you to help us pass government funding.
And what's Hakeem Jeffries going to say?
He's going to ask for some things.
Yeah.
And that's going to be very interesting to see whether or not they'll tolerate needing to make deals like that. And that's the same thing that got Kevin McCarthy kicked out, is needing to go work with Democrats to fund the government.
We live in interesting times, Brendan Buck. It's great to hear from you. It's great to see you. Thank you for offering your wisdom on all of this.